Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes. Normally, we have music, but we do not today because I don't have the sound hooked up on my computer, and you don't want me to sing for you. It isn't pleasant. But please introduce yourself in the chat, name, pronouns, your neighborhood, and I'll introduce myself out loud since I'm talking. My name is Kate. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Columbia City. That's in District 2. Now it's awkward.
I'm typing in the chat.
Well, and we'll give people, let's see, what time is it now? It's 6:03. We're going to give people just another 2 minutes to filter in before we get started. And if folks want to hold on for just 1 second, I can grab my dog and make her be on the screen because I think that's probably entertaining.
Did you say you were going to grab Eggy? Oh, there's Eggy. How's Eggy doing?
Horrible. She she peed on the sheets and the rug today, inches from the puddle pad on the carpet. It's just been a nonstop chasing her around. But that's what happens when you're dealing with an ancient dog.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 6:05. Eggy, you can go back over here.
Aw, sweetie.
Okay, let's get started. Welcome to B Seattle's second Building Tenant Power Workshop of the year. Housing justice is climate justice. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Kate Rubin. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the organizing director at B Seattle. I'm joined today by our operations director, Tanya Moore, and our guest speakers, Jamie Potasic from Futurewise, Cecilia Black from B Seattle's Board of Directors and Seattle DSA, Erin Coda with 350 Seattle, and Laura Lowe with Share the City's Community Education. Our workshop coordinator, Ariana Laureano, is not with us tonight. She's recovering from surgery and is doing well. She planned an awesome event for tonight, though. And if you've ever been to any of our past workshops, you know that Ari is also our tech wizard. So let me just thank you all in advance for your patience if our transitions are not quite as smooth as usual. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement. We are on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to recognize that we are occupying the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. We encourage each of you to sign the petition for federal recognition of the Duwamish tribe, and if you're able, visit the Longhouse and pay rent to the Duwamish. You can learn more from Real Rent Duwamish. We'll include a link for them in the resource guide that we'll be sending after the presentation, along with contact information for the Renting in Seattle Helpline, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, also known as SDCI. They're responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws, and a bunch of other helpful information. Let's start off with a few announcements. Happening right now, Stop the Sweep Seattle and other mutual aid activists are occupying the space outside of City Hall to protest encampment sweeps. If you attended our workshop last June, you know that sweeps are just another form of evictions. You can show up in solidarity or drop off supplies at the mutual aid tent at 4th and Cherry. They need hot food, socks, gloves, beanies, oatmeal, hot cocoa, emergency Pedialyte, cup of noodles, hand warmers, cigarettes, bottled water, Gatorade, sandwiches, and spoons and forks. Friday, February 25th at 12:45 p.m. So that's our time. It's 2:45 p.m. Central Time where the host University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is located. There's a free virtual talk that is open to the public. Dean Spade, In This Together, Feminist Mutual Aid for Survival and Mobilization. Dean Spade is a professor at Seattle University School of Law. He's the author of Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. Also Friday, February 25th at 6 p.m., 350 Seattle is hosting February Story Circle. Story circles are community building space for learning, listening, and sharing stories towards centering supportive and accessible creative practices, helping people connect with their climate stories, examining and challenging the dominant stories in our culture, and imagining the future we'll build together. They invite you to join them to learn, listen, and tell stories. This month's theme is zines. They'll discuss zine making and show some of their favorite examples of self-published works. And then everyone will make a mini zine on the call or work on their own zine submissions. No experience necessary, just a single sheet of paper, some scissors, and a writing or drawing utensil. This discussion will continue the collective zine making process that will culminate in a story circle zine in the spring. And then Monday, February 28th at 11:59 p.m., King County is closing applications for the Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Program, EPRAP. This program has limited funds and assistance cannot be guaranteed. Tenants who have already applied and are not necessarily guaranteed assistance. But if you are behind on rent, we strongly encourage you to apply because also on Monday, the 28th, Seattle's eviction moratorium ends. Unfortunately, yesterday, legislation to extend it further failed in council, with council members Juarez, Peterson, Nelson, Strauss, and Lewis voting against it. So if you want to know who to be mad at, there you go. SDCI has asked us to share this graphic to make sure that you know your rights. According to the analysis on the first year of the moratorium performed by the Housing Justice Project, 53.6% of tenants defaulted, meaning that they didn't respond to the paperwork, go to the hearing, or violated a previous stipulation. So the courts signed off on the eviction without even hearing from the tenant. So we just want to make a few things really clear. If you receive an eviction notice, the first thing you should do is call the Renting in Seattle helpline to confirm that it's valid. If it doesn't have the updated phrasing required with the new tenant protections, they'll contact the landlord and demand that the notice be reissued. At a meeting with SDCI and tenant advocates last week, we were informed that a vast majority of the notices being issued right now are not valid because of the language used, which means that you will likely buy yourself a bit more time. The turnaround time for Renting in Seattle to respond is currently about a week, so you'll need to call right away. And then the next thing you should do before you even hear back from SDCI is contact the Housing Justice Project. We have a right to counsel, a right that we fought for and won last year. So you should take full advantage of it. They're working with a high volume of clients, so the more time they have to prepare, the better. Just a reminder, there are many ways to resolve issues. Don't just assume that just because you got a notice that you have to leave. Let's see, and then Seattle's next Building Tenant Power Workshop is on Wednesday, March 23rd at 6 p.m. The workshop will be co-hosted by the House Our Neighbors Coalition and is about social housing. Do you know the difference between affordable housing, public housing, and social housing? What could social housing look like here in Seattle, and how can we organize together to make it a reality? Let's talk about it. We'll have several guest speakers, including Councilmember Tammy Morales, who is my council member in District 2. And consider joining our team. We love engaging with our community, so please reach out to us if you're interested in joining our board, developing your skill as part of a tenant leadership team, volunteering to help us build an app, tabling, or hanging up flyers. We can also help you build renter power in your building by helping you organize with your neighbors. I'm now going to pass the mic to Tanya to tell you a little bit more about tonight's topic. Housing justice is climate justice.
All right. I'm so glad that you all decided to join us today. We really appreciate it, taking time out of your schedules. Here in Seattle, we have made a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050. While we are one of the greenest cities in the United States, before the pandemic, we were not on pace to meet those goals. As much as 50% of our carbon footprint comes from commuters who are driven to live far away from their workplaces by the lack of affordable housing in the city. Seattle has invested in public transportation, which has mitigated a lot of the increase in our carbon emissions as our population has continued to expand massively in the past decade, increasing by up to 31%. At the same time, our our commute numbers only went up by 9%. The past 8 years have shown that public transportation is the only thing stopping a massive spike in carbon emissions as a result of our growing city. However, public transportation alone cannot address this issue, which is caused and fueled by the lack of affordable housing in the city. Even the construction workers that build the city often cannot afford to live here and must drive hours to work. One of the key points of the concrete truckers and drivers who went on strike last month was that they can't afford to live in the city that they're growing and building. Seattle has the second most construction cranes of any city in the US and has been leading the country's construction boom since before the pandemic hit. Seattle is the very definition of a sprawling city. That's why we at Be Seattle have invited our speakers here tonight to talk about what you as renters who care about the environment and affordable housing can do to impact change in 2022. In Washington State, we have the Growth Management Act, or GMA. The GMA is a state law that requires state and local governments to manage Washington's growth by identifying and protecting critical areas and natural resource lands, designating urban growth areas, preparing comprehensive plans and implementing them through capital investments and development regulations. The approach to growth management is unique among states. The GMA allows for coordinated growth and development with the goal being to preserve the environment, protect the quality of life for Washingtonians, and to promote sustainable economic development. However, it has a massive vesting loophole that majorly undermines the bill, and there has been decades-long fight to fix it. We're going to drop the link in the chat with the details on that if you're interested in learning more in just a few minutes. With that in mind, I would like now to introduce Jamie Potasic. Jamie's pronouns are she, her. She's been a community organizer working at the intersection of climate change and social justice since 2014. She is currently the lead organizer for Futurewise's Washington Can't Wait campaign, where she supports individuals and organizations to advocate for legislation that would help address the climate and housing crisis in Washington. Go ahead, Jamie, and thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya. Let me get my slides up here. Everybody see these okay? Awesome. Great. Thanks again for having me. Like Tanya said, my name's Jamie. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm the lead field organizer with Futurewise's Washington Can't Wait campaign. Just really quick for folks who might have not heard of Futurewise before, we are a small nonprofit based in Seattle, but we work across the state to encourage healthy, equitable, and opportunity-rich communities and to protect our valuable farms, forests, and water through really wise land use policies and practices. And the majority of our work we do through the framework that we have here in Washington called the Growth Management Act. And Tanya gave a really good overview of what the GMA does. But just to reiterate, it is a statewide framework that guides how local governments have to plan to manage growth and what elements they have to consider in their comprehensive plans. So this is everything from concentrating growth in urban growth areas to supplying adequate housing. And I'll just mention that the housing element of the Growth Management Act was pretty ineffective, but last year we successfully passed House Bill 1220, which will make more stringent requirements around the types of housing, the income levels they have to be affordable to, and will also require that cities are addressing the ways in which their housing policies have had racially disparate impacts on communities of color. And they'll have to implement policies and programs to prevent displacement. So we're really looking forward to working with jurisdictions in the years upcoming to make sure that that bill is implemented and that we're actually getting folks the housing that they need. The GMA also requires that we're supplying our urban areas with adequate facilities and services and transportation. And that in doing all of this, we're growing in a really smart way where we're protecting our rural landscapes and our critical habitats and our important buffer zones. But as Tanya mentioned, the Growth Management Act has done a lot of good in the last 30 years. It was first written in 1990, but there's a few areas where we think it can be improved. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a bill we're working on called House Bill 1099. Before I get to the Sprawl Loophole, this bill would add a new climate change planning element to the Growth Management Act. Right now, the GMA does not talk about climate change at all, which is pretty crazy given what we know about how our land use decisions impact not only our contribution to the climate crisis through our emissions, but also our ability to be resilient and to have healthy communities that are not being harmed by climate hazards. And so the policy of the bill itself would require that our 10 largest counties are making plans to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and their vehicle miles traveled to meet state goals through state goals for reduction for both of these things through our land use and transportation planning. It will require that all counties are planning for climate resiliency and mitigation from climate hazards. So looking at what are the areas in our state where we're likely to see increased frequency and severity of drought and floods and extreme heat and forest fires, and how through our planning process can we make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable communities and our critical habitats, farms and forests from those hazards. It also includes some new environmental justice provisions. The first time environmental justice has ever been mentioned in the Growth Management Act, and it stipulates that our land use planning has to achieve environmental justice and cannot worsen existing environmental health disparities. So as cities and counties are making plans to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled, they can't make those reductions just by exporting them and pushing them away to another part of the state. So how does this relate to the housing crisis? I will just pause here. I know Deborah Beckwin is in the room. She's one of our amazing volunteers, and she wrote an incredible op-ed that I'm going to share in the chat that talks about these connections between the housing crisis and the climate crisis. And I think she says it in that article better than I will ever be able to, but I'll give it a go. So we know that one of the best ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and our vehicle miles traveled is to design cities that offer a diversity of housing options that meet the need at all income level. So anybody who wants to live in Seattle, anybody who works in Seattle, anybody who goes to school in Seattle should be able to find housing that is affordable to them. That housing should be connected with robust public transit and bike and pedestrian infrastructure so folks can access work, school, food, and services without having to get in a car and drive. So housing abundance and affordability is really key here. We will not meet the reduction requirements in this bill if we continue to have a housing landscape that is as unaffordable and inequitable as it currently is. And then we also know that when we're thinking about climate change mitigation and resiliency, that some of our most vulnerable populations are folks who are experiencing homelessness, who have no protection when we have weeks like this where our temperatures are plummeting, or when we have weeks of horrible air quality from wildfire smoke or extreme heat, which we're seeing happening more and more frequently. And so those would be the people who cities and counties would be requiring to center in their planning around climate change mitigation and resiliency if this bill passes. Timing is really critical for House Bill 1099. This is our last chance to pass this bill and for it to be implemented before King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap counties have their next comprehensive plan updates due. Those updates are due in 2024. These counties and the cities within them are already starting that update process. And so if we don't pass the bill this year, it will not be implemented in time for it to apply and be a requirement for these counties' updates. And that will put us another 10 years in the future until this type of climate planning would be required for these counties. So that's House Bill 1099. I guess just really quick, this bill is still alive and moving. It passed through the House really quickly. It's gotten through its Senate Policy Committee in the state legislature. It is now in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and it has a hearing tomorrow in that committee. And at the end of my talk, I'll share a really quick and easy and critical action that you all can take to support leading up to that hearing. Our second priority this year is to close the Growth Management Act's sprawl loophole. And Tanya mentioned this before. Essentially, what the loophole does, or what it is. So right now, a county can decide to expand their urban growth area or de-designate farmland or take some other action that will just open up more land to intensive urban development. If a group like Futurewise or another organization looks at that decision and thinks that it is unnecessary, that we have plenty of room to accommodate projected growth within our existing urban growth areas, or that decision by the county will result in the unnecessary conversion of farms or forests, they can appeal the decision to the Growth Management Hearings Board. The Hearings Board will then consider the appeal and make a decision. However, while the appeals process is taking place, there's two things that counties can and have done to subvert the appeals process. The first thing they can do is just start issuing permits to developers. Even if the appeals process is ongoing, they can start throwing out permits left and right for developers to build on that land. As soon as the permits are accepted, they're considered to be vested, which essentially freezes the developer's rights in time. The other thing that counties can and often do is they will just have a city annex the land that they're trying to expand into their city limits, which essentially moots the appeal, or allows them to claim that the appeal is moot. So the loophole here is that even if the hearings board later decides that the decision by the county is illegal, any permits or annexations that took place during the appeals process are still valid and development is still allowed to occur. And so just to give you a bit of a visual of what this has looked like across the state, we created this really great story map. And so if we haven't already, I'll drop the link to this in the chat so you can explore it. But as you scroll down, it gives an overview of the Growth Management Act, urban growth areas. You can see the urban growth areas in Washington state. And then it talks about the sprawl loophole, how counties use vesting and annexation to get around the appeals process. There's this really great graphic. This is an example from Snohomish County. So this is before the loophole was exploited, and then after, we have this really beautiful car dealership now built over some really prime agricultural land in a floodplain in Snohomish County. But the really fun part about this is it goes through 3 different case studies. One of them is in Spokane County, one of them is in Clark County, and one of them is in Snohomish County. And so this just gives some really great visualizations of where were these expansions taking place, what was happening with the appeal, and what has the impact been. And in all of these cases, the impact has been the loss of farms and forests to really sprawling subdevelopments. So again, we'll share the link for this in the chat. This is just a really wonky issue. And for folks who are more visual learners, I think this is a really great resource to get a better grasp of why this loophole is such a problem. So with that, go back to my slides. So again, the impacts that this has, like I've said before, it undermines the intent of the Growth Management Act and the ability of the hearings board to enforce really important farm and forest protections, resulting in the loss of thousands of acres of farmland, forest land, and critical habitats. And it also puts a financial strain on jurisdictions. If there's development that's happening way outside of their urban growth area, there's then pressure on the city to provide infrastructure, roads, facilities, sewage, electricity to these new developments. And that can be really, really expensive. And so that increases costs for the city and for taxpayers. And sometimes those new developments just don't end up getting the urban services that they would expect, which is a really huge issue as well. And so how does this relate to climate and housing? One, we know that sprawl is antithetical to our climate goals. If we continue to grow out, we're going to continue to increase pressure on individuals to drive and have really long commutes to get to where they need to go if the only housing they can find or afford is 15 or 20 miles away from where they work or go to school. these sprawling single-family developments are often expensive, both for the environment, for the climate, for local jurisdictions, for taxpayers, and for residents. It is not the type of housing we need to be building to meet the need and really address the housing crisis. And we also know that sprawl results in disconnected communities that lack infrastructure and services and get us further away from this vision that I think we all share of having, housing rich neighborhoods where you're able to walk and bike to your corner store and to school and take the bus, and where you feel a real community connection because you live so closely with so many incredible and diverse folks. And so if we want to address climate change and the housing crisis, we know we need to be building housing rich communities in urban areas that are already well connected with public transit, pedestrian infrastructure, and are serviced with the facilities and amenities that folks need. So the takeaway here is that this loophole as it stands gives an incentive and the ability to counties and developers to create housing that is not just more expensive to individuals and jurisdictions, but it gets us further away from meeting our climate goals and from our ability to create really strong and connected communities. Senate Bill 5042 passed out of the Senate and has just last week been voted out of the House Environment and Energy Committee. So it's now waiting to be brought up for a vote on the House floor. So now is a really critical time for you all to be reaching out to your representatives and asking them to vote yes on this bill. Here's an overview of what 5042 would do. I guess that's important. So this would close the loophole, and it's a really easy fix, and it essentially just ensures that a really small group of land use changes that counties can make are allowed to be reviewed by the hearings board before they go into effect. Pretty simple that counties, you cannot issue permits, you cannot annex land until the hearings board has decided whether or not that proposed action is legal. So again, 5042 really needs support right now to get through the House, and House Bill 1099 has a really important hearing coming up tomorrow. So these are two action links that we'll share in the chat that you can take. The first one will take you to a form email that you can send to your representatives. The second one will take you to a page on the Washington State Legislature website where you can sign in pro for House Bill 1099, and your support will be noted on the legislative record. Both of these actions combined probably take less than a minute and can have a really big impact. So I hope you all will take the time to do that. And that is all I have for you. So I'll turn it back over to our hosts. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. While folks, please just take a moment to fill these out. So our next speaker is going to be Cecilia Black. Cecilia's pronouns are she, her. She is a disabled Seattle renter, a member of Be Seattle's board, and an organizer with Seattle DSA's Housing Justice Working Group. Cecilia first got engaged with disability organizing as a member of Access Living's Disability Rights Action Coalition in Chicago. Since then, she has worked with a community in Tibet to create a shared space for Tibetans with disabilities through wheelchair basketball. She is also a member of the Cross Disability Advocacy Network with Disability Rights Washington and involved with the Disability Mobility Initiative. All right, Cecilia, take it away.
Thank you. I'm so excited for this workshop. I am in the middle of rugby practice, so if there's any whatever distractions for the community center, I apologize. But I really, wanted to just talk for a moment about disability, how disability plugs into housing and transit and climate. And I think especially in advocating for climate, lots of the solutions and the things that the disability community has been advocating for years is also the same solution that we're advocating for when it comes to housing and climate. And so I think that it's just so important to have disability justice be part of the conversations that are connected to racial justice and climate justice and housing justice. because I think that there's a tendency still to, when we talk about disability, we talk about it in a vacuum, and sometimes that's appropriate to have a discussion of just disability issues, but so often it means that the knowledge and the advocacy that's happening in the disability community is not at the table when we're talking about other things like climate. Thinking about I guess climate justice and housing, people with disabilities are more likely to live in areas that have environmental pollutants, and there's still not a lot of data tracked about disability, unlike other groups. But new research shows that you can kind of almost track where there are environmental hazards by where the most people with disabilities are, and that obviously intersects completely with communities of color. But it's just, that's something that we haven't really even started collecting data on, is disability and the environmental impacts. And so when we think about like zoning, for example, most of our city is zoned up for single family homes, and that is also homes that have no requirements. There's not a lot of design interest, and still a lot of stigma about create what accessible home is. And so like 75% of Seattle is zoned essentially to be inaccessible, along with all of these other impacts. And so when we think about zoning laws, we don't generally think about accessibility going hand in hand with that. And obviously it's not the one solution for accessibility, but that's something that the disability community has been advocating for a long time, is having more accessible housing options, and just single family homes cannot accommodate the huge needs for accessibility. And then I guess like I really wanted to plug Disability Mobility Initiative because I'm so excited about all of the work that they're doing. I am very much just kind of along for the ride, but Anna Zeiberts is just an amazing activist, and she is a woman with a disability that relies on public transit. And Disability Mobility started, I think it's a little older than a year, and they've just been collecting so many stories about people with disabilities and riding transit. And in just a year, they've made such a huge impact on, I think, on legislation. I think that's like a voice that they're really organizing that hasn't been heard from, along with like Front and Center, Communities of Color, and 350 Seattle. They have a pretty amazing just transit initiative. And when we look at the housing bill or the transportation bill that's in the legislature this year, it's obviously still so much work. There's still $4 billion for highway expansion, which is, we know, and it contributes to the climate crisis. But at the same time, the budget allocated for public transit and multimodal sidewalk and bike lanes, that went from 6% to almost a quarter of the budget, so about $4 billion this year. And that really, I think there's so many factors, but having people of color and having people with disabilities organized to push the needle made a pretty big impact. So as a person with disability, it's just so empowering to look at KUW or the Urbanist and read about the transit package and see Anna and all the work that Disability Mobility Initiative has been doing, and really see people with disabilities are at the table in this conversation. So I'll post a link to Disability Mobility Initiative, because they also are doing a story map, which I think is just such a great way to help visualize and humanize all of these issues and to really bring collective power. And so anybody who relies on public transit is encouraged, and we really want people to fill this out. You don't just have to have a disability. And I'll post that in a second. And And as I was filling out this, my own, like thinking about my own transit mobility story, transit has such a huge impact on where we can live. And that like stems from the sidewalks on up. In Seattle, there's 25% of our city does not have sidewalks, which is, I think, 11,000 blocks. And the Seattle budget has money to build sidewalks 25 blocks a year. And that's a huge problem. And Seattle spend a lot of time mapping out which sidewalks are like navigable, which ones have huge issues, which ones are in good condition. And it's, if you look at the map, I'll also post that in a second. If you look at the map, it's most of it, our city is in like not great condition. And so just even thinking about like where you can leave your home, like relies on just having a sidewalk. And then people that rely on transit all the time, we've completely underinvested in that. And so like really paying attention to people with disabilities who often have to rely on public transit, and really listening to their lived experience helps create transit that everybody wants to use. If you think about even just like sidewalks, they are like such an effective tool for making safe neighborhoods. They're really effective for making people want to use public transit in general. It's people that often rely on cars. And yeah, so I will post those 2 links here. And as to be perfectly honest, I have not paid attention to what's happening with the transit bills this week. I know that there is a hearing Monday with public testimony for the proviso, and that is a supplemental bill that's just provides supplementary transit budget for the next year. So it's not like the huge transit package that we're also passing. But in that, a really important piece that I think was really fought for by people at Front and Center and Disability Mobility Initiative is a research, money for research to actually study how many people are non-drivers in the state. And that I think will have hopefully huge outcomes on how we invest in transit. I think right now, the Puget Sound, I think is estimated to have 46 people rely on transit and are non-drivers, and yet we still build our city for drivers.
So I think Cecilia may have cut out, at least she did for me. Cecilia, was there anything else that you needed to say?
No, sorry. Yeah, that's all I have for you tonight.
Okay, well, perfect timing. And thank you so much for sharing about that. It's just kind of amazing to see how all of the social justice issues intersect: housing justice, climate justice, disability justice. And we have to be cognizant of that as we organize. Otherwise, we leave people out, and that's not a way to develop a better world, which is what we're fighting for, all of us. So that our next speaker is Erin Cota. Erin uses she or they pronouns. Erin is an organizer with 350 Seattle's Green New Deal team focusing on education. Erin, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Like Kate said, my name's Erin. I'm a volunteer with 350 Seattle, and I am particularly focused on the Green New Deal. So hopefully I can give you a little bit of context for the city and the Green New Deal and how, what's going on, and yeah, give you a little bit of knowledge about what's going on there. I want to make sure I can see the chat, so hang with me for a second. Where did my Zoom go? Alrighty. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is show you a little bit of kind of what's been happening around the Green New Deal in Seattle. So starting the first kind of where our story starts a little bit is in 2019, the council passed the 2030 resolution for Green New Deal for Seattle. And not only did this establish what they think a Green New Deal for Seattle would be like, and we're going to actually explore a little bit of that on the next slide, but it also established this community oversight board as well. And 350 Seattle participates in that board along with frontline community members, environmental justice advocates, labor leaders, a whole bunch of different folks who are trying to give guidance to the council about what would it mean to have a Green New Deal for Seattle. And since then, since this resolution, there have been some wins, maybe not giant wins, but there have been some serious wins around investments for Green New Deal solutions. So I'm going to show you a few of those. In 2020, the Jumpstart funding it's been calculated to raise about, or to fund about $20 million worth of Green New Deal solutions every year. In 2020, it was actually more like 14 million because it all depends on how much that progressive revenue raises. But that's one example of one of our wins. The Commercial Energy Code update in 2021 made a big difference because it says you can't have new fossil fuel heat for new commercial buildings, especially large ones. So that was a big win. Solidarity budget, 350 Seattle was really involved, and my team was really involved with the solidarity budget this last budget cycle, and we won some Green New Deal investments there too. And then our biggest win to date actually was solar schools, which came just this month with the school levy. The school levy included $18 million in Green New Deal solutions investments in it as well. So some really exciting things happening, but not the type of investments, not of the hundreds of millions of dollars level, right, that we would need to make a Green New Deal for the city, right? So some progress, but we're not quite there. So let's dream a little bit about what that could look like if we truly had a Green New Deal for the city. So I'm going to show you a little bit of text from the resolution that was passed in 2019, what it says, and then we're going to chat a little bit about what that means. So it says, it will make Seattle free of climate pollutants. It will prioritize investment in communities historically most harmed by economic, racial, and environmental injustice. Will advance an equitable transition from an economy based on extraction and exploitation to one based on regeneration and cooperation. And lastly, that it'll create stable, well-paying jobs that prioritize local hires and fair treatment of workers. So that's a lot, but this is like very aspirational language, and to me, very kind of inspiring language. And what I would love to hear in the chat is, what would this mean for your life? If this were true, if we had a Green New Deal for Seattle and the type of investments that living up to this, guidelines would mean, how would your life be different? What would that mean for your life? Give me some thoughts in the chat, please. Thanks, Laura. Better air quality in the Inner Bay area. Yeah, absolutely. Free of climate pollutants. That's what it says, right? What else? I know for me, I live just outside of the city. So this would mean being able to get into the city really easily, right? And not having to drive my car. My kids might be able to afford to live in the area. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, absolutely. No more environmental health disparities. Absolutely, Jamie. That's called out specifically in the text. Affordable energy costs, especially during thermal extremes. Yeah, Sam, absolutely. We know more of those are coming, and it would be affordable to heat or cool your home. Thanks, folks. Keep those coming. Rebates for energy retrofit. Conversion from gas to electric. Yeah, we would all be able to get off gas. Less fear while biking. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robin, for thinking about like emotionally what that would mean. Andrea thinks construction jobs that are building and repairing commonwealth rather than extracting from public to privatized wealth. Yeah, love how you put that. Thank you, folks. This is fabulous to see what you all are thinking about. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep talking, but I'll check back in and maybe we'll have a few more in there. So I'd like to do this little kind of imagining exercise because this living with having a Green New Deal in our city would really change enormous amounts of our lives. It would change really many aspects of our lives. And it kind of really starts to illustrate these connections between housing, climate, and transit. And other people have talked about them today. I'm sure Laura is coming after me, is going to talk about them too, but I think it's worth reiterating that when we have unaffordable housing that leads to displacement and sprawl and greatly increased emissions from driving. So that's in our little transit triangle here, and transit is our biggest source of emissions. Road transportation is the biggest source of emissions in Seattle. We also see the connections with our homes and how do we heat and cool our homes and more fossil fuel use. We see larger homes as well because of how our city is unaffordable. Energy efficiency upgrades are inequitable. I see people mentioning that in the chat as well, right? We talked about it costs money to get off fossil fuels, and it's inequitable who can afford to do that. And then lastly, this is all connected to zoning. We've mentioned zoning before. Cecilia mentioned zoning, which was awesome, thinking about, you know, the connections to communities. Low density zoning, zoning most of the city for single family homes. This allows affordable transit oriented housing. And we know zoning is tied to racial injustice, to many different types of injustice and toxic waste sites and environmental injustice, and is exclusionary by design. That's how zoning works. So just to tie all of those things together for you, this is like these are the problem slide. So let's split to the next slide, which is a little bit more about like dreaming again about what these Green New Deal solutions could look like. And one topic that you might hear being talked about and has been kind of mentioned today is this idea of 15-minute neighborhoods. Some people call them 20-minute neighborhoods. But the idea that you could get everything that you need in like this little small ring around where you live, right? Within 15 minutes of where you live. And I'm going to try using the little pointer on PowerPoint. We'll see if this works. I'm sorry if it makes you crazy, but you could have transit, biking, walking, safe streets, and transit connections within 15 minutes of your house. Your work, all of the needs met, right? Your groceries, your healthcare, school and libraries, as well as like natural areas, natural spaces. We need these things as human beings, and care for the people in our lives, childcare, care for elderly folks, etc. So this is a way to think about how could we redesign our city? What would really living with a Green New Deal look like? This idea of 15-minute neighborhoods is one way we could think about it. All righty. So I'll wrap up just by plugging some things that 350 Seattle's Green New Deal team is working on. If you want to get involved with us, our next big thing is we're doing a Green New Deal book club, our podcast club, if you don't want to read, but it's a short book. We're reading this book, A Planet to Win, Why We Need a Green New Deal. It's like 90 pages. And then we're getting together at a community event on April 3rd to talk about which parts of that book really inspire us and what we can do about it. So we'll be breaking into kind of affinity groups and thinking about, maybe some of us will be thinking about housing, some will be thinking about transit. It should be really fun. We have new offices. So I will put the link in the chat for how to sign up for that. And we have free and very low cost copies of this book as well, or you could listen to the podcast. So we'd love to see you if this is something that you're excited about. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was awesome. And I'm sorry that that didn't get on our calendar of events at the beginning, but I will make sure to include the link when we send the follow-up email. So we've got one more speaker for tonight. Laura Lowe. Laura uses she, her pronouns. Laura is a renter in 98119, a former board member of B Seattle, and the founder of Share the City's Action Fund and Share the City's Community Education. Laura is going to talk with us about green housing zoning. Fun. Go right ahead, Laura.
Hi, everybody. And everyone give like a little stretch or like 7th inning stretch here. You know, we've been sitting here for almost 50 minutes. So a little stretch moments, grab a snack real quick. You can eat while I talk. So when I started my environmentalism journey, and when I was thinking about this workshop in terms of environmental justice and housing justice, that word justice at the end really changes things. So when we just talk about regular old environmentalism, you know, a lot of people, you know, there was the polar bears and the ice melting and the ozone when I was growing up. And, you know, I moved to Seattle and I joined some organizations that were longtime environmentalist organizations. And they were kind of shifting and making kind of like a work in progress towards actually being climate justice organizations. And the same thing happens with housing. There's housing advocates and then there's housing justice advocates. And so for folks that are new to those words or those terms, or even if you've used them before, just really like take time and really think about, you know, what would it take to achieve housing justice or disability justice or racial justice or environmental justice? And, you know, on a organizational level, we have this conversation about, you know, that we're work in progress, that we are moving towards housing justice, we're moving towards environmental justice, we're moving towards racial justice, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And so I think part of moving towards a justice framework when we're talking about these important issues and how they intersect is also a lot of reflection. I am a renter, but I have a fair amount of housing stability. I'm Latinx, but I have a great deal of white presenting privilege in terms of how I experience Seattle and other spaces. And we can do that both on an individual level about our identities and also kind of in a real nerdy way about words. And so I just want to kind of frame what I'm going to present as how Share the City's community education in our work, what resources we use to move from kind of just regular old housing advocacy and environmentalism and, you know, getting good policies passed, how we're moving from that really important policy work to kind of more of a justice framework. One of the things we've done over the last few years is get involved with mutual aid. You know, we went out to Stop the Sweeps today and dropped off some socks and some mittens and some other stuff that folks asked for. We bring people into our organization who are really nerdy about zoning, like so nerdy about zoning, and try to say, you know, that's a really good thing to stop the next housing crisis. But at the same time, we need to think about what's happening right now. And what I really like about B Seattle is, and why I was a board member, was that they do focus on kind of all the pieces, the long-term things that we can do to prevent the next crises, the things that we can do right now. There's mutual aid Mondays, as well as the kind of mitigation of people that are suffering right now in terms of empowering people to speak up and organize their buildings or access legal support or know their rights and all of that stuff. So it's a really nice, like, holistic approach to, and it's a lot, right? So I just wanted to kind of say all that. There's a document that I made that's like the resource document. I was trying to open it a second ago. I don't know if Kate, if you have a link to it, let me try to get it pulled up here. So green zoning is a term that I think I first heard this architect, Matt Hutchins, using it. And at first I thought it was kind of like, I don't really like it, but I've actually decided to steal it and use it. I'm going to share the link here in the chat. I don't know if I can share my screen. It's okay if I can't. But if you look in that document, there are a lot of resources. So It says green zoning is a made-up term that for share the cities means land use decisions around what can be built and where that helps us reach our climate goals. Here's a resource list to help you educate yourself and your communities about the connections between housing justice and climate justice. And I'll have a confession here for all of you. Don't, tweet about that I said this. But when I first made this list, I started with transit-oriented development. And then when I thought about how this was a housing justice and climate justice workshop, I was like, let's put the justice part first. And so, I still catch myself at times with a real bias towards like wonky zoning, land use words like TOD, let's define it, transit-oriented development. Why is it good? Why is it not good, right? And transit-oriented development is a fancy word for housing near transit. And so, I wanted to start there because like when you think of green zoning or you think of climate and housing, my like wonky urbanist brain goes straight to this like policy solution space. But I have become educated by Puget Sound Sage and other organizations. First with the Our People, Our Planet presentation. I went to the like presentation of this document. So powerful. And what was powerful about this isn't just the research that they did, but the way they did the research. They paid people for their time. It was people that they trusted in the community. There was a participatory research aspect of it. So when you're looking for like sources to educate yourself, think about how the people did the research. Like go to that level if you can find out, and be like, was this done at people or with people? And so I think that's the difference between like environmentalism and environmental justice. And Puget Sound Sage is really like the best place to go to learn about that. And then the second thing, their general page that talks about equitable development, there is on there a brand new recent report that came out, and these kind of reports talk to each other. So there's, yes, exactly, not as extraction. It's actually building power in the community while they're doing the research, not kind of co-opting it or exploiting it. And so the other one is the disaster gentrification, disaster capitalism report that they did recently around being worried, like when we do a COVID economic recovery, how are we going to repeat some of the same mistakes? So I think that one of the things that a justice framework does is it looks at things in context of history, and it tries not just to do equality and make things equal and fair, but tries to make up for past wrongs by maybe, kind of putting the hand on the scale of justice in favor of the folks that in the past, were left out. And land use is such a gate-kept, wonky, the amount of like, you feel like you need like a planning degree to engage in it. When I started engaging in this, a lot of people told me, go to planning school and then I'll talk to you. And I refused. But I heard that from surprising folks were saying that to me. So I started with Puget Sound Sages, the two research, the equitable development research that shapes the work that we do, and then that Our People, Our Planet that really helped me decide to kind of craft the social justice urbanism organization, Share the Cities. I have the Green New Deal for housing, both Seattle's Green New Deal that you heard about from Erin, as well as Senator Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal for housing. And Data for Progress really broke that down. There's also another resource I didn't put in here because I was just trying to do two per category, which is the Homes Guarantee. And the Homes Guarantee is it from People's Action, that's nationally. And they talk a lot about social housing and green social housing. So, if I was going to throw a third link in my nerdy doc, I would put, I'm just going to put it on here because I can't resist because it's like the best thing ever. So the Homes Guarantee from People's Action, you can look it up, and it's like a roadmap of how we can guarantee homes for everyone, green, union homes, social housing, multi-class. When we talk about social housing, which is next month's workshop, it's multi-class housing. It's not like nonprofit housing where if you make over a certain amount, you no longer qualify it, and then you have to find somewhere else to live. Like you could live there for the rest of your life, regardless of your income. That kind of thing. We just don't have a lot of that in our society. And the last two are kind of where you get into the real like deep wonk urbanist space. And these are kind of what would be termed kind of the neoliberal solutions around housing policy. So there's Seattle's Living Building Pilot Program and Shoreline Deep Green Incentive Program. We're going to go back to those in a minute because I have some critiques about those two programs. And then the last thing is housing benefit districts. There's a real big push, both at and with communities. So it's coming from both directions around housing benefit districts. Sound Communities is doing really good work. Patients at Housing Development Consortium is involved with that. And the Housing Benefit District is a transit-oriented development pilot that is trying to get funded by the state around more funds for more affordable housing near transit. Because at the end of the day, we can have all these big hopes and dreams, and we need funding. So the Housing Benefit District is a way to fund this type of solution where people are living near where they work and near transit, and the less people have to pay for their cars and to get around, the more money they have for housing. So it frees up people to have more money to participate in this messed up capitalist system that we have. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that transit-oriented development is popular as a housing solution, because people can ditch their cars, ditch the car payments, ditch all that. And then, for some people it can make a really, really big difference in terms financially. Again, I don't think that that's a transformative solution at all. I think that that's a harm reduction solution in the face of kind of the broken capitalism. Okay, so going back to the City of Seattle's Living Building Pilot Program, which is what I told Ariana. Hi, Ariana. I know you're watching this. I told Ariana I would talk about the Living Building Program and a very specific example in Magnolia. And then there's the City of Shoreline Deep Green Incentive Program. So in Washington State, we have really pro-developer, pro-profit laws around property more than other places in America, and definitely more than other places in the world. One of the things you can't do for developers is take their money, like a taking. So a lot of our rules are set up as incentives or pilots and things like that, because we're not allowed to, we're like legally barred from extracting profit in certain ways from developers and development. And so you'll see that in the Living Building Pilot Program, they get an extra floor. So if something's supposed to be 6 stories in Magnolia, they can get a 7th story that allows them to offset the extra costs for green building, which are very, very, very expensive. So building green is very expensive. And so the city has come up with this pilot program to give people a density bonus. That's a common strategy, since we're not allowed to like mandate that all the buildings are green. We should be, we could be, maybe if there was the political will, maybe if some state laws changed, we could make all new buildings have to be green. It's very complicated. And then the City of Shoreline has a really cool deep green incentive program, which when I found out about it some years ago, I was really excited about. It hasn't been successful as much as it could have been. But what I like about Shoreline's deep green incentive program, the good part about it is that for those of you that want to get real nerdy about this, it shows you that there's a whole bunch of different kinds of green definitions. So when we have these slogans, I have a bumper sticker on the back of my Prius, I'm very like a stereotype that says Green New Deal, right? Like, I hope you're all laughing right now. When we talk about green building and green incentives, what we're really talking about is all of these things: passive house buildings, the Living Future Institute program, a Built Green certification. Some of you may have heard of LEED certification. There's salmon safe buildings. There's all these different things that have been, these policies that have been developed. And what Shoreline did is that for different programs, you get a different bonus, a different density bonus. And so there's this little chart there. And so that's kind of like the deepest, nerdiest wonk chart that I'm going to scare you with. But the thing with this chart is that it shows you all the steps that you have to do to apply in Shoreline for the program. and receive your permit and all the steps. And that can take years. So why should renters care, right? We're in a renters workshop. We're talking about all this like fancy development stuff. The reason that renters should care, the eviction moratorium is expiring on the 28th. If we had developed a program 10 years ago in the last comprehensive plan process around green buildings, if we'd developed a plan for more places for renters to live with lower incomes near transit, if we'd done more 10 years ago, we would have more housing now and renters would be less rent burdened. And if you look at cities that have high rent burdens, what you also have is very, very, very high homeless rates. So there's a book coming out in the next 2 months that everybody should read. Greg Colburn wrote it with another guy, his name escapes me right now. And I'll send that link to Kate to send to all of you. But that book shows that the biggest predictor of homelessness in cities is the lack of housing. And so if we get at that justice piece again and making sure that housing is a human right, all of these things chip away at housing abundance and housing access and housing choice and the amount of housing where people have sidewalks or they have the ability to live as non-drivers and be able to live near their cultural institutions. So when we talk about racial justice, it's not just about rezoning a rich part of town so that folks can move in there. Not everyone from a community of color is going to want to move to Magnolia or Laurelhurst, right? Like folks want to be near their like faith organizations and their people and the cultural things that like, you know, are familiar and that like, you know, their grandparents maybe like helped found or something. And like, and so giving people the options to have, you know, access, you know, school access and school desegregation is super important, but we also want to make sure that we're building enough housing in the areas where people live right now so they're not displaced and they don't have to like, you know, go to a community that they don't really feel like they have roots in or that they have a sense of belonging in. So 2 things can be true, and Share the Cities tries to educate folks. Share the Cities community education knocks on doors, tables, talks to neighbors. We're developing scripts right now to talk to different neighbors. We're doing a thing in Wallingford. We really focus on areas of low displacement and high opportunity. That's kind of our specialty. And what that means is areas that rich people have kind of like hoarded all the land for themselves and aren't sharing it. So part of Share the Cities is that idea of like, you have the light rail in your neighborhood. You might have to have an apartment next door to you. You might have to have an affordable housing apartment next door to you. You're not allowed to kind of be anti-renter. I've been to thousands of hours of land use meetings. And you often hear, unfortunately, a lot of anti-renter sentiment. And so that's one of the reasons as a renter that I started doing this advocacy, is that I was appalled at some of the things that I was hearing and some of the assumptions are making. So my last point is that, to tie it all together, quick story about the living building pilot. There was a building going up in Magnolia above a grocery store. So ideal, you know, you could shop down below, live upstairs. And the people in Magnolia wrote in and said they didn't want this building because it was too tall. It was going to block their views of a park from kind of the alley behind. Other folks wrote in and said they didn't want the apartment because renters, you know, would be noisy. You hear that a lot all across the world, not just in Seattle. Renters are somehow really noisy. They're going to have lots of parties. In this case, we've heard this in a few cases in Seattle. The renters were going to be looking at their children in the pool across the street. There's a public pool, and they didn't want renters looking at their children. So we can all kind of hear what's going on there. This building was a living building challenge building, a living building pilot program building. So it got an extra floor. And so when I went to the design review meeting for it, where a lot of this stuff gets held up and delayed, there was a big pushback that the building, that it was somehow there was something nefarious going on, and that extra density bonus, that extra story, was a kickback to the developers from the city, and all this kind of like, real kind of comic book language around what it is and what it isn't. And so there's a lot of suspicion, and I absolutely think government has failed all sorts of people, and that people have a right to be cynical about the government. But as we're trying to make these green buildings and these policy proposals, it's just good to be ready for the range of things you're going to hear if you decide to show up to fight for more housing in your neighborhood. You just need to be emotionally ready as a renter to hear a lot of stuff that sticks with you, that haunts you, that makes you feel like you don't belong in your own community. And so just kind of emotionally being ready for that if you're going to be advocating. And yeah, I was really surprised at the things that were said and the skepticism. And then the last point I want to make that's really depressing is that the design review board, who are a bunch of volunteers, a lot of them also homeowners that live in the neighborhood, spent a whole bunch of time worrying that the benches outside were going to have people sleeping on them that didn't live in the neighborhood, and really trying to like advocate for hostile architecture. And so I feel like the living building in really gets at that like justice piece around how climate and housing justice are connected, and how the design review spent a lot of time fielding questions and undermining the legitimacy of this living building program, which is a really great program, and spending time on how they could have more hostile architecture to prevent people from sleeping that have nowhere else to go. So that's my super sad story to end it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Laura. All of our speakers today, Laura, Erin, Cecilia, Jamie, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to us about this. It's just such a complicated issue, and there's so many different intersections, and the more we can look at it from a social justice lens, from an equity lens, the better we can move forward. Sorry, that came out a little stumbly. And actually, Laura, I just realized I still have you pinned, so everyone is staring at you. Let me unpin you. Sorry about that. There we go. And I'm actually going to share my screen. We have one more action to take for the evening. So just give me 1 second. Here it is. Okay. Can folks see this? It's not on my screen for some reason. There it is. Okay. Okay, this one is from the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. Both the House and the Senate have released their proposed budgets. Both include an increase to the aged, blind, and disabled cash grant and funding to prevent evictions and foreclosures. The House proposal also includes $78 million for homelessness workforce retention and $55 million for rental assistance, which is very much needed as communities are already running out of federal funds. As we noted earlier, EPRAP is closing applications on the 28th, the same day as the moratorium ends here in Seattle. Let's see, both capital budgets include significant investments in affordable homes, but the House goes further than the Senate and invests $521 million, including $100 million for the Housing Trust Fund. So please call the legislative hotline and ask the operator to deliver a message to your senator asking them to match the House investments. In the link that Tanya just dropped in the chat, there are a few sample scripts. Your message will be more powerful if you add something about why this matters to you or how the affordable housing and homelessness crisis impacts your community. So I'll leave this up for just a moment. I'm also going to be sending this information in the follow-up email tomorrow. This is time sensitive, so please make that call tomorrow during their office hours, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Okay, and now I'm going to stop sharing. As we're finishing up, we just wanted to have a quick community discussion, and I think that Erin touched on this a little bit. So now that we've talked about all of the ways that housing justice intersects with climate justice. Sorry, I just lost my spot. Let's talk about how some of this impacts you personally. What are the priorities that you seek for when you're searching for housing? What's your commute like now? What would your ideal city look like? Is your place of work easily accessible by public transportation currently? And who do you think is missing from this conversation, or who did we not acknowledge that we need to as we organize together? So let's see. I'm trying to hop back into the meeting. Okay, so I feel free to turn on your camera, no pressure. Feel free to come off mute, use the chat, however you want to engage, but we want to give folks just an opportunity to talk to each other. Because there's a lot to take in, and I thought it was, I learned a lot just sitting here, and I've been working in housing justice for a long time. And I see our board member, Dolores, is here. Hi, Dolores. Dolores is helping us plan an upcoming workshop for seniors, and certainly a lot of the points that Cecilia especially touched on are especially relevant to our elders. I don't think Cecilia mentioned this, but approximately 25% of the population will be disabled at some point in their life. And, getting older is a privilege, but your body doesn't keep up with you all the time. And we really need to be preparing for us as younger people as we age, and then how can we care for our existing population and make things more accessible so they're not isolated. So sorry for putting all that and just pointing at Dolores, but I'm just so excited to see you. So please come off mute. Don't leave me being the only one talking.
I mean, I always have more to say. Hi, everybody. I don't know if we can do in the grid view so I can see everybody.
I think you have to set it on your own settings, but I've got mine in grid right now.
Okay. I'm like, I want to see everyone. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I think I just want to acknowledge, that this was a, white presenting panel. And so you're getting a really specific lens on how those of us that don't experience environmental racism or housing discrimination based on race, we're like dancing around that because nobody wants to speak for another community. But I just wanted to name that was left out of this discussion, and that, some of the pioneers and the people that have been living this the most, that, we're doing environmental racism before dealing with environmental racism and fighting it and developing these tools and strategies to address these issues for forever, that a lot of the ideas of that I do were stolen from those folks, I got it from someone that stole it from someone. And so, it's always good to kind of know your history and to trace back the ideas as far as you can. I had this conversation with a bunch of bros, and I know we're recording and I shouldn't say this. Are we still recording?
I can stop it for a second.
No, it's okay. I'll just say it. So there's the Homes Guarantee, which is a national way to solve the housing crisis that was developed by communities of color, mostly like folks that are kind of like in the working families party back east that are tenant organizers. There's the KC Tenants Union. There's folks in New York and Philly and other places. And so the Homes Guarantee is people's action, right? So really rooted in people that understand what tenants and low-income people and low-income workers are struggling with. And really like living intersectionality, not just like theorizing about it, right? And so then there was this kind of competing thing that came out at the same time, that was kind of like the Elizabeth Warren version of this comprehensive way to solve it. Like, Elizabeth Warren, I got a plan. And these guys at Data for Progress, I had like written for them a little kind of seed thing with this other guy, and then they kind of took it and turned it into this big giant thing. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful policy plan. But the thing that they called it, and chapters they use, and some of the phrases were directly things that I've heard at like anti-eviction protests in Chicago and immigrant rights marches and all these things. And and I asked them, I was like, do you know that the language that you're using is from those spaces? Like, and that you're using it to like dress up your report? Like, are you in community with those people? Have you done that work? Like where did you hear these ideas? And so I think that anytime any of us with any sort of different privileges can take on that role to be like, like, do you know what you're doing? Did you do it by accident? Are you just straight up co-opting it? Like, what's going on here? So I just want to bring that up in terms of like all of us as being some people that care so much about housing and climate that we showed up tonight. If you're comfortable asking those questions when you can, or if you're sick of being the one to do it, getting people together and being like, okay, can you take, I took the last, I call them Brobernists. I took the last Brobernist. Can you deal with this one this time? And I know some of you have done that for me. So I like I say, like, I love that, report. Elizabeth Warren's housing platform was based on that report. But just those kind of things, those moments where you're like, like, not sure. Anyway, that's my thing.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm seeing a comment here from Andrea. Let's see. I'm a longtime single parent and an apprentice construction worker. When I've looked, I made too little to qualify for affordable housing, and public housing was booked. So I've paid more for the cheapest market rate housing. I've also experienced housing discrimination for my family status. I dream of a sun-filled, warm, quiet, and not cramped space for myself and my child where we can both access public spaces, transit, and school and work easily, and truly only using 1/3 of my income to pay for it. Beautiful. I love it. Please come to our social housing workshop next month too, because that's something that we are definitely fighting for. And let's see, I saw Dolores, you came off mute. And then I also noticed that another board member is here. Hi, Anne. And Anne is a landlord who's on our board. And I just, we get accused of being anti-landlord a lot. And I just wanted to point out that we have an amazing landlord on our board who is engaged. And she was busy testifying for the state legislature a couple of weeks ago. She's just really amazing. And so I just wanted to give her a shout out to you. And Anne, if you want to add anything after Dolores, please go ahead. Go right ahead, Dolores.
Oh, absolutely. Stay tuned, because our senior workshop is just the opening salvo for a whole bunch in that whole arena. They're really going to cover. So it'll be good. And it'll be transferable to all the different areas, much like tonight when you could speak about climate change and how it related to various different areas. The same with the seniors, obviously. If it doesn't relate to you yet, just wait. Someday, hopefully, you'll be a senior. So anyway, we'll come to the workshop when it's on, okay?
Thank you so much for plugging that. And I'll have to confirm with Ariana. I think you were talking probably May, June-ish for the senior workshop. Yeah. Perfect. Here's another comment. I'm breathless with disappointment that the Seattle City Council didn't extend the rental protection. Yeah. Me too. Yesterday was a strange day for Seattle because organizationally, like, Ari's having a surgery that she's been ready for a really long time. And our board president, Dee, who is a person who's been experiencing chronic homelessness for nearly 7 years, just got keys to their first apartment in so long. It was just so happy. And then hearing that news, I was just devastated. I still am, and we still, I think, need to talk together. And maybe we want to talk tonight about how to organize around this, and what eviction prevention can look like here in Seattle, and what can we do to make sure that our neighbors aren't displaced completely from the city, because we know that's coming. We know there isn't enough housing, as Laura really delved into. So if you get evicted, how are you going to stay? Where are you going to stay? Are you going to try to sleep on a bench with hostile architecture? I mean, it's a problem. So we're still processing that too, but yeah, a lot of emotions. Okay, it looks like no one has anything else to add, which is okay. It's been a really long meeting, and before we go, looks like there's a question here in the chat. I think it was during Laura's presentation, I had a question come up. Is it a green building if people can be evicted from it? Whoa. Laura, thoughts?
I'm gonna steal that and tweet it out. I'm gonna send it. I might have to tweet that one from the account that doesn't have 500 followers but has 8,000. Yeah, Andrea, if with your permission, I can either say workshop attendee or not. But yeah, I love it. Or maybe you could tweet it out and tag me if you want to take credit for it. It's your quote. You want to be Twitter famous for it, because I feel like that one could go viral. But yeah, anyway, what I do want to say is, that's next month's workshop, but House Our Neighbors is really like solutions driven, long term and then short term. But I think I get inspiration from the KC Tenants Union in Kansas City, which are involved with People's Action, which are involved with the Homes Guarantee. And so they have had an eviction crisis this whole time because they didn't have any protections, anywhere in the whole time. So you can look around and see what other cities are doing around the country to get inspiration, because they have way less. I think we're one of the last places to have protections. And while the eviction moratorium is ended and you can still be served and noticed, I was asking Kate about this before the meeting. It sounds like if you can prove hardship, you still get a 6-month extension to get that legal support that you need, because there's a state law that everybody can get access legal support if you're facing eviction. So I don't know. So the not to like celebrate that at all, like it's still devastating, but zooming out nationally, other folks never even had anything.
And I just wanted to comment on that a little bit further. This was something that was years of organizing efforts to achieve on a statewide level. So, credit to the Washington Low Income Housing Association and the Tenants Union and all of these other housing justice advocates who really fought for it, because it is an amazing right that not everyone has, and we're kind of leading the way by having it statewide. We also have it in Seattle, and ours are a little less restrictive, as you just have to say that you can't afford a lawyer. You don't have to do any kind of proving of your income or anything like that. And that those protections will continue on past the 6 months. Just make sure that you take advantage of them. As I mentioned earlier, more than half of tenants just didn't come to eviction court, and so it's automatically ruled against you. And I know sometimes it seems like you're like, well, I couldn't pay. Obviously, it's just going to go against me. But there's a lot of nuances to the law, and there's a lot of steps that landlords need to take that they are not taking. Some of them don't even know about it. And I'm sure you probably hear some stuff in your landlord community that makes you cringe. And so don't like let yourself be defeated before you even have a chance to fight. The Housing Justice Project is amazing. They're such a fantastic organization. And we are really lucky that we have them here in King County. So please take advantage of it. So landlord says, Anne says, landlords are crazy / the worst in the legislative spaces. Could not agree more. I had a real estate attorney crash our housing and homelessness advocacy meeting to talk about how we should be giving money to landlords to help with problem tenants. It was an interesting conversation. Thank you all so much for sharing space with us here tonight and participating in our action. I will be sending out the follow-up email tomorrow. I've been tracking all of the links that were dropped in the chat. So it's going to be a long email coming out, and especially with the actions, make sure that you do them tomorrow if at all possible. They are time sensitive as they are related to the state legislature. And just from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much. Have a great evening.